"Will you marry me?" asked the wealthiest man in the county to the widow, who for the past 6 months had been peeling potatoes in his kitchen. She stood there, frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched a damp dish towel. Marianne never imagined that those quiet conversations in the kitchen, always late at night when the rest of the house was asleep, could lead to something like this. Can you imagine the heart of a simple woman who had lost everything, who woke up at 5 in the morning to stoke the wood-burning stove, suddenly hearing a marriage proposal from a lonely millionaire who hadn't stepped foot off his estate in 15 years? But this story happened in the rural South back in 1928, and the road to that moment was far deeper than anyone could have expected. Before we go on, I want to ask you something. If you're following along, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, what city, what state, or even what country. I just love knowing that these old-time stories are reaching so many different corners of the world. And hey, if you're a sucker for true love stories, the kind about overcoming the odds that just warm your soul, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. It really helps me keep bringing these tales to you. Now tell me honestly, would you accept a sudden proposal like that? Let me know in the comments. To understand how Marianne ended up in that kitchen, with her heart beating so hard she thought it might burst right out of her chest, we have to go back in time. We have to go back 3 years, to when she was still married to John Rogers, a good man who worked as a hauler in the village of Oak Creek. They lived a simple but happy life in a small 2-room clapboard house. But it was theirs. John would wake up before the sun to pick up loads at the train depot, delivering supplies to farms and transporting folks between towns. Marianne took in sewing, baked pies to sell, and on weekends they'd walk to the town square for an ice cream. They didn't have children yet, but they dreamed of them. She was 29, he was 32, and they thought they had their whole lives ahead of them. Tragedy struck on a day of heavy rain in April of 1925. John was hauling bales of cotton to a plantation when the wagon wheel shattered on a steep, muddy hill. He tried to hold it back, tried to control the horses, but the weight was too great. The wagon overturned, and John was caught beneath the wheels and the heavy load. By the time they found him, it was too late. Marianne received the news at her front door, delivered by John's helper, a 15-year-old boy, sobbing so hard he could barely speak. She didn't scream, she didn't faint. She stood completely still, as if the world had stopped turning. Then came the funeral, the emptiness, and the cold reckoning of reality. John had debts Marianne knew nothing about. He had borrowed money to fix the wagon months prior, had a tab running at the general store, and owed 3 months of rent on the stable where he kept the horses. Marianne sold everything of value, her wedding band, the 2 good dresses she saved for church, even her mother's cast-iron skillets. But it wasn't enough. The stable owner took the horses back. The owner of the broken wagon demanded payment for the damages. She lost the little clapboard house she thought they owned, only to find out the bank still held the deed. Within 6 months, Marianne was living in a tiny, drafty room at the back of Mrs. Gable's house, a widow who rented spaces to folks down on their luck. The room had a narrow cot, an old trunk, and a window with a cracked pane she had to cover with a rag when it rained. Marianne sewed from 5 in the morning until midnight, taking any work she could get. She mended old clothes, embroidered linens, took in washing. Her fingers were constantly pricked and sore. Her back ached from hunching over fabric for hours on end. But what hurt the most was the loneliness that sat on her chest like a stone weight. At night, when she blew out the candle and lay on that narrow cot that groaned with every movement, Marianne cried in silence. She cried for John, for the life they could have had, for the children never born. She cried for the humiliation of losing everything, of depending on the charity of others, of having nothing left to call her own. But every morning she got up, washed her face in a basin of cold water, pinned her hair into a tight bun, and went back to sewing, because giving up wasn't an option, because she had to eat, she had to pay for that miserable room, she had to survive. It was Mrs. Gable who brought the news that would change everything. It was late afternoon on a Friday in October of 1927, and Mariana was finishing monogramming a wedding sheet when the landlady knocked. "Child, I heard of a job that might interest you," Mrs. Gable said, letting herself in. Marianne lifted her tired eyes. "The Willow Creek estate is looking for a cook," the woman continued, settling onto the edge of the bed, which creaked under the extra weight. "It's a fair piece away, about 12 miles, but they provide room and board on top of the wages. They pay well, $15 a month." Marianne felt her heart quicken. $15 was nearly double what she scraped together sewing. "But I don't know how to cook for a large party," she replied hesitantly. Mrs. Gable waved a hand, dismissing the worry. "The estate doesn't have the bustle it used to. The owner lives alone in the big house, barely receives guests. You'd be cooking for him, the housekeeper, and a handful of staff. It's quiet." Marianne bit her lower lip, thinking. "Why are they looking?" she asked suspiciously. "The last cook asked to leave," Mrs. Gable said, avoiding her gaze. "She didn't like it there, found the place too lonely, too silent. But you don't mind the quiet, do you?" There was something in the way Mrs. Gable said it that made Marianne uneasy. "What else did you hear about the place?" she pressed. The landlady sighed. "Look, the boss is peculiar. Rich as Croesus, inherited the family fortune, but he lives locked up in that mansion. Rumor is he was left at the altar years ago and never got over it. Doesn't go out, doesn't see anyone, runs everything by letter and telegram. But he pays on time, treats the help with respect. He's not a bad man, just lonely." Marianne sat in silence, processing. A wealthy man, living in isolation, a farm far from everything, a job that would take her away from the village, where every corner reminded her of John. "I'll take it," Marianne said before her courage could flee. "When can I start?" Mrs. Gable smiled, relieved. "There's a supply wagon heading up there Monday. You can hitch a ride, pack your things. It's a live-in position. And child, listen to me. This is a good chance. Grab it." Marianne nodded, but that night, lying in the dark, fear tightened her throat. She was leaving the only place she knew, going to an isolated estate to work for a boss no one ever saw. But what did she have to lose? She had already lost everything. Maybe this fresh start was exactly what she needed. The journey to Willow Creek Estate took nearly 4 hours in a wagon pulled by 2 stubborn mules. Marianne sat wedged between crates of dry goods and sacks of flour, clutching her bundle of clothes in her lap. The driver, Mr. Bennett, was a man of few teeth and many stories. "First time heading up to Willow Creek, miss?" he asked, as the mules plodded along the red clay road. Marianne nodded. Mr. Bennett chuckled low in his throat. "Beautiful place, but sad. Mighty beautiful and mighty sad. That big house looks like it's in permanent mourning." Marianne watched the landscape unfurl around them. It was November, but the southern air was still thick. They passed vast cotton fields, rows and rows of white bolls waiting to be picked. They crossed 3 creeks, crested 2 hills, and finally, in the middle of the afternoon, the estate came into view. The mansion appeared first, grand and white, with 2 stories and wide porches lined with towering columns. It possessed a majestic beauty, but there was a melancholy air about it, just as Mr. Bennett had said. The shutters on the 2nd floor were drawn, the front garden was manicured but flowerless, and a heavy silence hung over everything. The mules stopped at the side entrance, near the kitchen. A tall, thin woman with completely white hair, pulled into a severe bun, appeared at the door. "You must be Marianne," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I'm Mrs. Mercer, the housekeeper." Marianne climbed down, her legs stiff from the ride. "I only brought the essentials," she said, showing her bundle. Mrs. Mercer nodded in approval. "That's enough. Come, I'll show you your room and the kitchen, then we'll discuss the routine." The room Mrs. Mercer showed her was in the servants' quarters, annexed to the main house. It was small but spotless, with a real bed, a wooden wardrobe, a small table and a chair. It even had a glass window looking out onto the orchard. After 3 years in Mrs. Gable's miserable room, this looked like a palace to Marianne. The kitchen was enormous, with a 6-burner wood stove, a large work table, shelves lined with copper and cast-iron pots, and a massive pantry stocked with goods. "You'll cook for Mr. Robert, for me, and for the 4 hands who live on the property," Mrs. Mercer explained. "Breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 7. "And Mr. Robert?" Marianne asked with curiosity. "How does he like his meals?" Mrs. Mercer's face grew serious. "Mr. Robert eats little and always alone. You prepare the tray and I take it to his study. He never eats in the dining room." Marianne frowned. "Never?" Mrs. Mercer shook her head. "Never receives guests, never leaves the house, never joins the staff. He lives locked in his office or his room on the 2nd floor. Sometimes days go by without me seeing his face. He just leaves the dirty dishes by the door and takes the clean ones I leave." That seemed profoundly sad to Marianne. A man so rich, in such a beautiful house, living like a ghost. "Why is he like that?" she ventured to ask. Mrs. Mercer sighed deeply, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I've worked here for 30 years, Marianne. I knew Mr. Robert when he was a boy. He was a happy boy, full of life. But 15 years ago, he was set to marry. The bride was beautiful, from a prominent family in Savannah. 2 days before the wedding, she ran off with his best friend. It was a terrible scandal. Mr. Robert never recovered. He shut himself off from the world and was never the same." Marianne felt a pang of empathy. She knew pain, she knew loss, she knew how betrayal could kill something inside a person. In the first few days, Marianne focused on learning the routine. She woke at 5, stoked the fire, brewed strong coffee, and toasted fresh bread with butter. Mrs. Mercer took the tray to Robert's study. Then Marianne prepared a hearty breakfast for the staff, who were simple, good people. There was Mr. Thomas, the foreman of the cotton fields, his wife, Mrs. Agnes, who ran the laundry, and the 2 brothers, Pete and Mike, who worked the crops. They all ate together in the kitchen, talking and laughing. Marianne began to feel welcomed. But the mystery of the invisible boss intrigued her more and more. She never saw Robert, but she knew he was there. Sometimes she heard footsteps upstairs late at night when everyone else was asleep. She heard the creak of a chair from the study when she carried trays up and left them at the door as instructed. Once she heard a piano being played, a sad and beautiful melody drifting from the music room that was usually kept shut. It was like living with a ghost who left traces but never materialized. Marianne began to pay attention to his preferences through the plates that came back. Robert liked simple food, not the elaborate recipes she tried at first. He preferred fluffy rice, well-seasoned beans, steak with onions, boiled vegetables. He liked peach cobbler or cheese for dessert. He never left anything on the plate, which meant he approved. Marianne started cooking with special care for him, imagining who this lonely man might be. Was he old? Was he grumpy? Why did he never allow himself a conversation, a bit of company? One night, about 2 months after Marianne arrived, she couldn't sleep. The moon was full, and its brightness flooded through her window, illuminating everything. She decided to get up, grabbed a shawl, and walked to the kitchen, thinking of making some chamomile tea. The house was steeped in silence, the stillness broken only by the chirping of crickets. Marianne lit a candle in the kitchen, put the water on to boil, and stood staring out the window at the garden bathed in silver light. "You can't sleep either." The male voice from the kitchen doorway made Marianne jump, nearly knocking over the candle. She spun around, heart racing, and for the first time in 2 months, she saw Mr. Robert Allister. He stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing a white shirt with sleeves rolled up and dark trousers. He was tall, taller than Marianne had imagined, broad-shouldered, with an elegant bearing. He had dark brown hair that was a little too long, as if he didn't care about his appearance, a shadow of a beard and eyes that, even in the dim light she could see, were intensely sad. He wasn't old as she had pictured, maybe early 40s, and there was a beauty to him, a beauty bruised by time. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," he said, taking a step back as if ready to vanish again. Marianne took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "No, I just scare easy, Mr. Robert," she replied, dipping into a clumsy curtsy. "I was just making tea." He stood there, unsure whether to enter or leave. Marianne, sensing his awkwardness, acted on impulse. "Would you like a cup too?" she asked gently. "It's chamomile, helps with sleep." Robert hesitated so long Marianne thought he would refuse, but finally he nodded and stepped into the kitchen with cautious steps, as if invading foreign territory. He sat at the end of the long wooden bench, hands clasped on the table. Marianne prepared 2 cups, added sugar, and sat on the other side, leaving a respectful distance between them. They sipped the tea in silence for a few minutes. It was Robert who broke the silence. "Do you like working here?" he asked, looking at his cup rather than her. Marianne nodded. "Yes, sir, everyone is very kind. The estate is beautiful." Robert gave a small, sad smile. "It used to be more alive. There were parties, music, people. Now it's just silence." Marianne didn't know what to say. "Mrs. Mercer told me a little of your story," she ventured carefully. "I'm very sorry for what happened." Robert finally lifted his eyes to hers, and Marianne saw surprise in them, as if he didn't expect compassion. "It was a long time ago," he said, his voice low. 15 years. I should have gotten over it." Marianne shook her head. "Pain doesn't have an expiration date, Mr. Robert. I lost my husband 3 years ago, and there are still days it hurts like it was yesterday." Robert looked at her with interest for the first time. "You were married?" Marianne confirmed it and told him briefly about John, the accident, and how she lost everything. She spoke without self-pity, just with the honesty of someone acquainted with grief. Robert listened in absolute silence, and when she finished, he looked thoughtful. "I am sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. "You are still young. You will rebuild your life. You will love again." "That's what everyone says," Marianne replied with a sigh. "But the heart doesn't obey what the head commands, does it?" Robert gave a short, humorless laugh. "No, it certainly does not." They finished their tea wrapped in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, almost complicit. Robert stood up, thanked her for the company, and disappeared as silently as he had arrived. Marianne remained alone in the kitchen with the flickering candle, feeling that something had changed, though she didn't know exactly what. From that night on, Robert began to appear in the kitchen more frequently, always late, always when everyone was asleep. He never stayed more than half an hour. They talked about simple things over tea, the weather, the cotton crop, childhood memories. Robert spoke little but listened much. Marianne realized he was starving for human conversation, for connection, but no longer knew how to function around people. She didn't push, asked no invasive questions, just offered her presence. One night, 4 months into her stay, Robert appeared with a book in his hand. "Do you like poetry?" he asked, almost shyly. Marianne admitted she never had much access to books. Robert then began to read to her verses by Longfellow, by Walt Whitman, while she kneaded dough for the next day's bread. His voice was beautiful, deep. It came alive when he read those words of love and longing. Marianne worked the dough, listening, and felt something strange happening in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was Mrs. Mercer who noticed first. Marianne, be careful, the housekeeper said one morning when they were alone in the pantry. Of what? Asked Marianne, feigning ignorance. Mrs. Mercer gave her a knowing look. Of your heart. I see how you look at him, and how he looks at you. Marianne felt her face burn. I don't know what you're talking about, Ma'am. Mrs. Mercer held her arm gently. I'm not judging, dear. I've worked for the Allister family for 30 years. I saw that boy grow up, saw him become a man, and saw that man die inside 15 years ago. In these last few months, I've seen him start to live again. It's because of you. You brought light back into this house. Marianne felt tears sting her eyes. But I'm just the cook, Mrs. Mercer. He's rich, important. I have nothing. The housekeeper smiled tenderly. You have exactly what he needs, a kind soul. But I must warn you, there are people who won't like this. His niece, Miss Cecily, visits once a month. She expects to inherit everything when he dies. If she suspects there's another woman in his life, she'll cause trouble. Marianne swallowed hard. There is nothing between Mr. Robert and me, she insisted. We just talk. Mrs. Mercer nodded, but her eyes said she saw more than Marianne wanted to admit. Cecily's visit happened the following week. Marianne saw her arriving in an elegant carriage, a young and beautiful woman, dressed in expensive clothes, full of affected gestures. Uncle Robert, she shouted, sweeping up the stairs of the mansion. Where are you? Marianne was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard raised voices coming from the study. Robert rarely raised his voice, but now it echoed. I don't need more money, Cecily. I've given you enough this month. Her voice whined in response. But, Uncle, I have expenses. You don't know how hard it is to keep up appearances in Atlanta. Mrs. Mercer entered the kitchen with a tense expression. She's asking for money again, she muttered. Every month it's the same. Marianne continued chopping vegetables in silence, but she was listening. Cecily evidently got what she wanted because she left the study with a victorious smile. At lunch, she invited herself to eat, something she never did. Who made this food? She asked, tasting the chicken fricassee. Mrs. Mercer replied it was the new cook. Cecily raised her eyebrows. New? Since when? 4 months ago, Mrs. Mercer answered patiently. Cecily looked thoughtful. I want to meet this cook. Mrs. Mercer had no choice but to call Marianne. She entered the dining room, wiping her hands on her apron, nervous. Cecily examined her from head to toe with calculating eyes. How old are you? She asked bluntly. 32, ma'am, Marianne replied. Married. Widow. Cecily gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I see. The food is good. You can go back to the kitchen. Marianne curtsied and left, but she felt Cecily's gaze stuck in her back like a dagger. That night, Robert didn't come to the kitchen, nor the next. Marianne felt his absence like a physical pain. Did Cecily say something? Did he realize Marianne was developing feelings and decide to pull away? Anguish consumed her. On the third night, she was washing the last pots when she heard footsteps behind her. Sorry I didn't come sooner. She turned and saw Robert standing there, looking tormented. Cecily got suspicious, he continued. Said I was different, more alive. Asked if there was someone. I denied it, but she didn't believe me. Marianne dried her hands slowly. And is there? She asked in a low voice. Robert took 2 steps toward her. Marianne, I am 45 years old. I was abandoned, humiliated. I spent 15 years convinced I would never feel anything for anyone again. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. But then you arrived with your quiet joy, with your kindness that expects nothing in return. And I realized I was waiting for the nights just to talk to you. I realized food tasted better because you made it. I realized I woke up thinking of you. Marianne's heart beat so loud she was sure he could hear it. Me too, she whispered. I wait for you every night too. I think of you too. Robert closed the distance between them, lifted his hand and touched her face with infinite delicacy. But I can't offer you anything but complications, Marianne. You deserve someone your age, someone who can give you a normal life, children, a future. I'm a broken man, a sick man. Marianne frowned. Sick? Robert nodded heavily. I have a heart condition. The doctor said I don't have much time. Maybe 2 years, maybe less. Marianne felt tears stream down. Then we need to make the most of every moment, she said firmly. Robert looked at her as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Do you understand what you're saying? Do you understand you're tying yourself to a dying man? Marianne held his face in her hands. I've lived through grief, Robert. I've survived the worst pain. I'd rather have a little time with you than a lifetime without you. And it was there, in that kitchen lit only by an oil lamp, that Robert kissed Marianne for the first time. It was a kiss both desperate and gentle, the kiss of a man dying of thirst finally finding water. But the happiness was short-lived. 2 days later, Cecily appeared again, unannounced, and this time she brought a lawyer. Cecily entered the mansion as if she owned the place, the lawyer trailing behind her carrying a leather briefcase. Marianne was in the kitchen peeling potatoes when she heard the commotion. "Uncle Robert!" Cecily shouted shrilly. "We need to talk, it's urgent!" Mrs. Mercer passed through the kitchen looking worried. "There's going to be trouble," she murmured. "That girl didn't come for nothing." Marianne felt her stomach turn with anxiety. She and Robert had agreed to keep absolute secrecy about what was growing between them, but now she feared it was too late. Voices drifted from the study, getting louder. Marianne heard Cecily accusing, Robert defending himself with a tired voice. Suddenly the study door burst open, and Cecily marched into the kitchen, eyes flashing with rage. "You!" she said, pointing a finger at Marianne like a weapon. "Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you think I didn't notice what's going on here?" Marianne stood up slowly, hands shaking. "I don't know what you're talking about, ma'am." Cecily gave a bitter laugh. "Don't know? A young widow alone, working for a rich and lonely man. It's the oldest trick in the book." Robert appeared in the doorway, face red with suppressed anger. "Cecily, enough. The lady is not to blame for anything." She turned to him with a triumphant expression. "Not to blame. Uncle, you are being manipulated. This woman realized you're vulnerable and is taking advantage. She wants your money, your estate, she wants everything." Marianne felt humiliation burn her face. "I never asked Mr. Robert for anything," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I work honestly, I earn my wage." Cecily scoffed. "Honestly? You think I don't see how you look at him, playing the victim to arouse pity?" Robert took 3 long strides and stood between Marianne and Cecily. "You've crossed the line, Cecily. Marianne is an exemplary employee and deserves respect." Cecily crossed her arms. "Then why are you different, Uncle? Why are you suddenly coming out of your office, talking to people, even smiling? She arrived a few months ago, and you changed completely. It's no coincidence." Robert took a deep breath, trying to control himself. "I changed because I was tired of living like I was dead, but that is none of your business." The lawyer, who had remained silent, observing everything, finally spoke up. "Mr. Allister, my name is Mr. Camp. I was hired by Mrs. Cecily to protect the family interests." Robert looked at him with disdain. "I don't need protection, least of all from you." The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. "With all due respect, sir, but Mrs. Cecily is right to worry. You are a man of considerable means. You need to be careful with opportunists who might take advantage of your condition." Marianne felt bile rise in her throat. This was turning into a nightmare. Robert noticed her state, and his expression hardened even more. "All of you out of my house, now." Cecily's eyes widened. "Uncle, you can't be serious." "I am deadly serious," roared Robert, with a voice Marianne had never heard before. "You come here, invade my privacy, insult my staff, bring a lawyer to intimidate me? Enough. I want you all out. And Cecily, do not come back unless invited. Cecily went pale. You'll regret this, uncle. When that woman leaves you with nothing, when you discover who she really is, you'll regret it. But then it will be too late. She stomped out, the lawyer behind her muttering apologies. Marianne heard the carriage leaving, wheels grinding on the dirt, and only then allowed her legs to give way. She sat heavily in the chair, hands covering her face. Robert knelt in front of her. Marianne, look at me. She lifted tear-filled eyes. He held her hands. Don't believe anything she said. You are not an opportunist. You are not taking advantage of me. But she's right about one thing, Marianne said, voice breaking. I am a poor widow working for a rich man. Everyone will think what she thought. Everyone will think I'm after your money. Robert squeezed her hands. I don't think that, and that's the only opinion that matters. Marianne shook her head. It's not, Robert. Your family matters. Your reputation matters. I can't be the cause of you pushing away the people you love. He gave a sad smile. Cecily doesn't love me. She loves my money. It's different. Since her parents died 10 years ago, she only comes here to ask for cash. Never asks how I am, never shows genuine interest, only wants to know how much she'll inherit. Marianne wiped her tears. Even so, Robert. This will complicate your life, and you already have your health to worry about. You don't need more trouble. Robert sat right there on the floor, leaning his back against the cupboard, a gesture so intimate and disarming that Marianne almost smiled despite the pain. Marianne, let me tell you something. When the doctor told me I had at most 2 years to live, 6 months ago, I felt nothing, absolutely nothing. I thought maybe it was even a relief. I was so tired of existing without living. He looked at her intensely. But now, for the first time in 15 years, I want to live. I want every day, every hour, because of you. Marianne's heart squeezed so tight she could barely breathe. Robert, I'm scared, she admitted. Scared of getting attached and losing you. I went through that once. I don't know if I can survive it again. He stood up and pulled her to her feet as well. Then we live one day at a time. No promises of a future I can't keep. Just the now. Marianne rested her forehead against his. And if the now isn't enough, what if I want more? Robert smiled, a true smile that lit up his tired face. Then let's enjoy the now and leave the later for later. In the following days, the tension at the estate was palpable. Mrs. Mercer walked around worried, murmuring that Cecily wouldn't leave things be. The other staff sensed something was happening, but didn't know exactly what. Mr. Thomas commented to Marianne one morning over coffee. Miss Marianne, if I may say so, the boss is different, more present. Even came to inspect the cotton fields with me yesterday. Been years since he set foot in the crops. Marianne tried to hide her smile. Good that he's improving. Mr. Thomas gave her a knowing look. Yeah, mighty good, and we know why he's improving. Marianne felt her face heat up, but didn't deny it. Mr. Thomas, do you think I'm doing wrong? The foreman shook his head vigorously. Wrong? That man was dying on the vine. You brought him back. How can that be wrong? But be careful here. Rich folks have interested folks around 'em, and that niece of his is a copperhead snake. Seen her pass through here a few times just to inspect. She's got her eye on everything. Marianne thanked him for the warning and went back to work, but the words echoed in her head. Robert and Marianne began spending more time together, always discreetly. He took her to see the mansion's library, a huge room with floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books. You can borrow anyone you like, he said with pride. Marianne ran her fingers along the old spines, amazed. She had never seen so many books in one place. Robert started lending her volumes, and in their nightly kitchen talks, they discussed stories, characters, favorite passages. Marianne discovered she had her own opinions on literature, that she could debate as an equal with a cultured man like Robert. He also took her to walk through the cotton fields at dusk, when the sun painted the sky orange and pink. He showed her how to examine the bowls, explained about yields and harvests, spoke of the plans he had for the farm before he gave up on everything. Marianne listened intently, asking intelligent questions, and Robert seemed to be reborn with every conversation. "You make me remember why I love this place," he said one afternoon, as they watched the fields stretching as far as the eye could see. "I had forgotten how beautiful it is. If you're enjoying this story, drop a comment below letting me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos." But the peace was short-lived. 3 weeks after Cecily's explosive visit, Mrs. Mercer woke Marianne in the middle of the night. "Quick, mister! Robert's taken ill." Marianne leapt from bed, heart racing. "What happened?" Mrs. Mercer was pale. "Chest pain. Breathing hard. I sent Pete to fetch the doctor in town, but it'll take time." Marianne ran to the big house, still in her nightgown, not caring about appearances. Robert was in his room, lying in the massive bed, his face grey with pain. When he saw Marianne, he tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "Sorry to wake you." She sat on the edge of the bed and held his hand, which was cold and clammy. "Don't talk nonsense. Where does it hurt?" Robert placed his free hand over his chest. "Here, like a stone crushing it." Marianne looked at Mrs. Mercer. "Warm water and a clean cloth. Hurry!" The housekeeper ran out. Marianne loosened Robert's shirt collar, helped him sit up a bit, propped against pillows. "Breathe slow," she instructed, voice calm despite her internal panic. "Slow and deep." Robert obeyed, fixing his eyes on her as if she were an anchor. Mrs. Mercer returned with the water and cloth. Marianne soaked the fabric and wiped Robert's face, forehead, neck. He closed his eyes, seeming to find some relief. They stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, until finally they heard the doctor's carriage arriving. Dr. Albright was an elderly man with white whiskers who had known Robert since childhood. He examined the patient carefully, listened to his heart, asked questions. Finally he sighed heavily. "It was a mild heart attack. Could have been worse. Robert needs absolute rest. No strong emotions, no physical exertion." Marianne felt guilt pierce her like a spear. All the stress with Cecily, the emotional intensity of recent times, it had all hurt Robert. The doctor prepared medication, left detailed instructions, and left promising to return in 2 days. Mrs. Mercer went to arrange tea and medicine, leaving Marianne and Robert alone. He reached out for her hand. "Don't make that face. It wasn't your fault." Marianne held his hand, silent tears streaming down. "It is. All this mess with Cecily, all this stress. I should have stayed away from you." Robert pulled her closer with surprising strength. "If you had stayed away, I'd be dead already. Not from a heart attack, but from loneliness. You gave me a reason to live, Marianne. Don't blame yourself for this." She rested her cheek on his hand. "But what if next time is worse? What if I lose you?" Robert wiped her tears with his thumb. "You will lose me, Marianne, sooner or later. We knew that from the start. The question is, do you prefer to enjoy the time we have or give up now out of fear of what's coming?" Marianne knew the answer. She had known since that first night they drank tea in the kitchen. "I want to enjoy every second," she whispered. Robert smiled. "Then stay here with me. Just for tonight. Just so I know you're close." Marianne lay on top of the covers beside him, head resting on Robert's shoulder, listening to his irregular heart beating inside his chest. It was an intimacy terrifying and comforting at the same time. They did nothing but lie there, fingers intertwined, breathing synchronized, until dawn painted the sky gold. When Marianne returned to her own room as light broke, she found Mrs. Mercer waiting. The housekeeper said nothing, just hugged Marianne tight. "He loves you, you know that," she murmured. "Never seen him look at anyone that way. Not even the fiancé who ran off." Marianne returned the hug. I love him too, Mrs. Mercer, and I'm so scared. The housekeeper pulled back, holding Marianne's shoulders. Then be brave. Love each other while you can. Damn the gossip. Damn Cecily. Life is too short to waste true love. Robert stayed on bed rest for 2 weeks. Marianne brought his meals, sat in the armchair in his room, and read aloud while he rested. Sometimes he fell asleep mid-reading, and Marianne took the chance to study his relaxed face, etching every detail into memory. Other times, they talked for hours about everything and nothing, about childhood, old dreams, regrets. Robert told her about the runaway bride, how he planned to build a life with her, have children, run the farm together. How the betrayal didn't just hurt because he loved her, but because it destroyed his trust in any relationship. That's why I was so scared when I started feeling something for you, he admitted, holding Marianne's hand. Scared of being fooled again. Scared of being a fool twice. Marianne squeezed his hand. And now? Robert smiled. Now I know you are real. That what you feel is true. Because if it were about money, you would have taken advantage when I got sick. Would have made yourself indispensable to earn gratitude, but you just stayed there, quiet, taking care of me without asking for a thing. That's not interest, that's love. Marianne leaned in and kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss that spoke more than words ever could. When they pulled apart, Robert had tears in his eyes. Marry me, Marianne. The question came so suddenly she froze completely. Robert continued, words tumbling out fast as if he'd held them too long. I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other, that I have little time to live, that it will cause a scandal. But I love you, and I want you to be my wife. I want to wake up every day with you beside me. I want this house to be yours too. I want to leave you protected when I go. Marianne felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Robert, She started but couldn't finish. He interpreted the silence as refusal, and his expression closed off. You don't have to answer now, he said, trying to sound casual, but obviously hurt. It was rash of me. Forget I asked. Marianne shook her head vigorously. That's not it. I'm not refusing. I'm scared. Scared because I want to say yes. But I'm afraid of what it will cause. Cecily will make our lives impossible. People will judge. They'll say I'm married for money. Robert sat up in bed, ignoring the doctor's orders for rest. And what if we let people talk? What if we live our life without caring about their judgment? Marianne, I wasted 15 years hiding because of what others said, what they thought. I don't want to waste one more day. If I have 2 years, I want to live those 2 years fully, with you, as husband and wife. Marianne felt courage swelling inside her, pushing away the fear. Then yes, she said with a firm voice, yes, I will marry you. The smile that lit up Robert's face was the most beautiful thing Marianne had ever seen. He pulled her into a tight hug, kissed her hair, murmured words of love she would keep in her heart forever. But the happiness was interrupted by a loud knock on the bedroom door. Mrs. Mercer entered without waiting for permission, looking distraught. Mr. Robert, Miss Cecily is coming back. I saw her carriage coming up the road, and she's not alone. There are 2 more carriages with her. Robert and Marianne exchanged a worried look. He got out of bed, put on his robe, and went down the stairs with Marianne behind him. They reached the living room just as Cecily walked through the front door without ceremony, followed by 4 men Marianne didn't recognize. Uncle Robert, Cecily said with fake sweetness, I heard you took ill. I came to bring doctors to care for you. The men didn't look like doctors. They looked like lawyers or bureaucrats with their briefcases and serious expressions. Robert crossed his arms. I already have a doctor, Cecily. I don't need another. Cecily gave a condescending smile. Uncle, Dr. Albright is a good man but old-fashioned. These gentlemen are specialists from Atlanta. They came to evaluate your condition. One of the men stepped forward. Mr. Allister, my name is Dr. Ferris. I am a psychiatrist. Robert turned pale. A psychiatrist. "Cecily, what are you plotting?" She sighed dramatically. "Uncle, you had a heart attack right after kicking your only family out of the house. You are living isolated with staff who might be influencing you. I'm worried about your mental state." Marianne felt horror freeze her blood. Cecily was trying to have Robert declared incompetent. If she succeeded, she could take control of his fortune, the estate, everything. Robert realized the same thing. "Get out of my house," he said with a low, dangerous voice. "Take your fake doctors and get out." Cecily signaled, and the four men spread out in the room, blocking the exits. "Uncle, be reasonable. Let's just talk. The doctors will ask a few questions, assess your lucidity. If everything is fine, they'll go, and so will I. But if they confirm what I suspect, that you aren't in a condition to make decisions, then I will be appointed your legal guardian." Robert lunged toward her, but Marianne held his arm. "It's not worth it," she whispered. "She wants you to lose control to prove you're unstable." Robert took a deep breath, controlling his rage. Cecily smiled victoriously, thinking she had won. "Dr. Ferris, you may begin the evaluation." The psychiatrist opened his briefcase and took out papers. "Mr. Allister, I'm going to ask a few questions about your mental and emotional state. Please answer truthfully." That was when Mrs. Mercer entered the room, announcing, "There's someone else arriving. A carriage just stopped." Everyone turned. Through the door came Father Anthony, the local priest, followed by Dr. Albright. "Robert, I heard your niece brought strangers to evaluate you," the priest said with a voice that echoed authority. "I came to verify if everything is all right." Dr. Albright placed his bag on the table. "And I came to bring the exams I ran on Mr. Robert. He's perfectly lucid, only suffering from physical heart issues, nothing that affects his mental capacities." Cecily paled. "But Father, you don't understand. My uncle is being manipulated." Father Anthony raised a hand, calling for silence. "Cecily, I've known your uncle for 20 years. I speak with him regularly. I can attest he is of sound mind." Dr. Ferris tried to intervene. "With all due respect, Father, medical issues require professional evaluation." "Dr." Albright stared him down. "I am a professional, a physician for 40 years, and I say this man is mentally healthy. You have no right to question him without a court order." Cecily realized she was losing. "Uncle, please," she tried one more time, voice teary. "I only want to protect you." Robert took a step toward her. "Protect my money, you mean? Cecily, I'm going to make you an offer. I will give you $10,000 now, today. But in exchange, you sign a document renouncing any claim to my inheritance." Cecily's eyes widened. $10,000 was a fortune, but it didn't compare to everything she hoped to inherit. "You can't be serious," she murmured. "I am," said Robert. "Accept or refuse, but if you refuse, you won't see another dime from me while I live." She looked around, seeking support, but found only disapproval on the faces of the priest and the doctor. Finally, defeated, she nodded. "I accept." Robert sent for the cash and made Cecily sign the document in front of the priest and the doctor as witnesses. She left with the 10,000, but with a face twisted in hate. "This isn't over," she hissed, looking at Marianne. "You will pay for destroying my family." And she stomped out, the four men behind her. When they were alone, Robert nearly collapsed. Father Anthony caught him. "Steady, son. It's over." Robert looked at the priest with gratitude. "How did you know to come?" The priest smiled. "Mrs. Mercer sent me a message. Good woman, that housekeeper of yours." Robert looked at Mrs. Mercer standing by the door. She shrugged. "I said I'd protect you, sir, and I do." Marianne approached her and hugged her tight. "Thank you," she whispered. Mrs. Mercer patted her back. "Now let's deal with something more important. Let's schedule this wedding soon, before more trouble shows up." Father Anthony raised his eyebrows. "Wedding?" Robert held Marianne's hand and announced, "Father, I would like to ask your blessing. I'm going to marry Marianne." The priest looked from one to the other, studying, evaluating. Finally, he smiled. "About time, Robert. About time you came back to life. When do you want to marry?" Robert looked at Marianne. "As soon as possible, if she agrees." Marianne nodded, too emotional to speak. Father Anthony consulted a small calendar he pulled from his pocket. "How about 3 weeks from now? Time enough for the banns to prepare a simple but dignified ceremony." 3 weeks seemed like an eternity, and at the same time, insufficient. Marianne floated between joy and fear. Mrs. Mercer took charge of preparations with military efficiency. She had a simple but beautiful dress made for Marianne, sewn in cream fabric with discreet lace. She organized a small party at the estate for after the ceremony. Marianne insisted it be just family and close friends, but Mrs. Mercer smiled knowingly. "Honey, when news spreads that the richest planter in the county is marrying the widowed cook, half the town will want to see. Better we prepare to host folks." She was right. In the following days, the news spread like wildfire in dry straw. Reactions varied. Some staff were genuinely happy, especially Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Agnes, who saw how Marianne had transformed Robert. Others were skeptical, whispering she was a smart gold digger. In town, ladies made sour faces and commented it was indecent for a widow to marry the boss so fast. But there were also those who defended them, saying 2 lonely hearts deserved happiness. Marianne tried not to mind the gossip, but some of it hurt. Once, going into town to buy thread with Mrs. Mercer, she heard 2 women talking loudly on purpose so she'd hear. "Look at the lucky one. Left a penniless widow, and now gonna be rich. Must have learned some tricks in bed." Marianne felt her face burn with shame, but Mrs. Mercer stopped, turned, and stared the women down. "Ladies, if you had 1/10 of the dignity and kindness this girl has, maybe your husbands wouldn't live at the tavern running away from home." The women turned red and silent, while Mrs. Mercer pulled Marianne away, head held high. Robert suffered in a different way. He received letters from distant relatives who never sent news suddenly concerned for his well-being. A cousin sent a private chaplain to convince him to reconsider. An old uncle threatened to disinherit him from the maternal side, to which Robert replied with a letter saying he needed nothing. The pressure was constant, but Robert remained firm. Every time Marianne asked if he was sure, if he didn't want to give up to avoid trouble, he answered the same thing. "I am absolutely sure. You are the best thing that happened to me." A week before the wedding, Dr. Albright asked to speak with Robert and Marianne together. "I have to be honest with you," said the doctor gravely. "Robert, your heart is worse than I hoped. The last attack weakened it further. I don't know how much time you have. Could be months, could be a year, maybe less." Marianne felt the world spin, but Robert squeezed her hand. "We knew that, doctor. Changes nothing." The doctor looked at Marianne. "Miss, you understand you could be a widow again very soon, that you'll bury another husband?" Marianne lifted her chin. "I understand, doctor, and I'd rather be his wife for a month than live 100 years without him." Dr. Albright sighed. "Then may God bless you both, and cherish every day." When the doctor left, Marianne finally crumbled. Robert held her while she cried all the tears she'd been holding back. "I'm so afraid of losing you," she sobbed against his chest. Robert kissed the top of her head. "I'm afraid too," he admitted, "afraid of leaving you alone. But Marianne, listen, these months with you have been more alive than the 15 years before. I regret nothing, and I don't want you to have regrets either." Marianne pulled back enough to look in his eyes. "I will never regret it, even when it hurts, even when you're gone, because loving you is the truest thing I've ever done." Robert wiped her tears with infinite tenderness. "Then let's live, Marianne. Let's live intensely every moment we have. And in the days leading up to the wedding, that is exactly what they did. They walked the fields at dawn, read poetry under the stars, talked about everything and nothing, laughed, cried, loved, and finally the day arrived. January 23rd, 1929, a Saturday of radiant sun. Marianne woke up in her room for the last time as Marianne Rogers. By the next night, she would be Marianne Allister, Mrs. Mercer helped her dress, pinned her hair up in a simple but elegant style, placed a delicate veil. When Marianne looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman she saw. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Mercer said with tears in her eyes. Marianne hugged the housekeeper. "Thank you for everything, for believing in me, for protecting us." Mrs. Mercer smiled. "Now go. There's a man waiting for you at the chapel." The ceremony was in the small estate chapel. Marianne walked there through the garden, Mr. Thomas offering his arm to escort her since she had no family. There were more people than expected. Estate staff, townspeople, curiosity seekers. But Marianne only had eyes for Robert, waiting at the altar with Father Anthony. When their eyes met, everything else disappeared. Robert wore an impeccable dark suit, his hair cut and beard shaved, and his expression upon seeing Marianne walk toward him was pure adoration. She gripped Mr. Thomas's arm tight, too emotional to trust her own legs. The chapel was decorated with white and yellow flowers, simple but beautiful. The afternoon sun streamed through colored glass, creating patterns of light on the stone floor. Marianne reached the altar, and Mr. Thomas placed her hand in Robert's with a significant squeeze on the boss's shoulder. Father Anthony began the ceremony with a voice that echoed softly off the old walls. "We are gathered here before God to join in matrimony Robert Henry Allister and Marianne Rogers." Marianne barely heard the formal words. She was completely focused on Robert, on the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. When it came time for vows, Robert spoke first, his voice steady despite the clear emotion in his eyes. "Marianne," he said, holding her hands in his, "I was dead inside when you arrived. I lived 15 years hiding from life, hiding from love, hiding from myself. You brought me back. You taught me there was still beauty in the world, that it was still possible to trust, that life was still worth living. I promise to love you every day God gives me, to make you happy, to honor you as you deserve." His voice cracked a little on the last phrase. "You are my redemption, Marianne." Marianne felt tears streaming freely down her face. "Robert," she replied, voice trembling, "when I lost John, I thought I could never love again. My heart was broken, closed, hurt too bad. But you showed me the human heart has infinite capacity to start over. You made me believe in love again, in happiness again, in a future again. I promise to be by your side in joy and pain, in sickness and health, all the days we have. Because every day with you is a precious gift I will keep forever." Father Anthony smiled tenderly. "By the words exchanged here today, by the vows pronounced before God and these witnesses, I declare you husband and wife. Robert, you may kiss your bride." Robert pulled Marianne close and kissed her with a delicacy and love so pure that some people in the chapel sobbed quietly. When they parted, Marianne saw tears in Robert's eyes too. "My wife," he murmured with wonder. "My wife." Marianne smiled through her own tears. "My husband." The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Mrs. Mercer had prepared a feast served in the estate garden. There was roast pig, savory stuffing, salads, traditional sweets. People ate, drank wine, talked animatedly. Marianne and Robert circulated among the guests, accepting congratulations. Some were sincere, others politely skeptical, but in that moment Marianne didn't care. She was married to the man she loved, and that was all that mattered. When afternoon turned to evening and guests began to leave, Robert led Marianne by the hand to the big house. Mrs. Mercer had prepared the master bedroom, which had been closed for years. Now it was clean, aired out, with fresh linen sheets on the huge bed. Candles were lit, filling the room with soft golden light. Fresh flowers in a vase on the dresser. Windows open, letting the night breeze enter, bringing the scent of jasmine from the garden. Robert closed the door and stood looking at Marianne as if he still couldn't believe she was real. "You look beautiful," he said, approaching slowly. Marianne felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. She had been married before, but this felt completely different. With John, it was young, simple love. With Robert, it was mature, deep love born of shared pain and loneliness. Robert touched her face with fingers that trembled slightly. "Marianne, if you aren't ready, we can wait." "There is no rush." Marianne shook her head and pulled him closer. "I am ready, more than ready. I want to be your wife in every sense." And that night they gave themselves to each other with tenderness and passion, erasing old scars, creating new memories. Afterward, they lay embracing, listening to the cicadas outside, hearts beating in sync. Robert stroked Marianne's hair spread over her shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered in the dark. "For what?" asked Marianne. "For making me believe in love again, for making me feel alive again." Marianne kissed his chest. "Thank you for choosing me, for loving me." The following months were the happiest Marianne had ever lived. She and Robert woke together, ate breakfast together, rode around the estate together. Robert taught her to ride a horse, despite her initial fear. Marianne taught him to cook simple dishes, laughing when he burned the rice. They turned the library into a private refuge, where they spent hours reading, talking, simply existing in each other's company. Robert began getting more involved with running the farm, visiting the crops, talking to the hands, making plans for the future. Marianne suggested they create a school for the workers' children. Robert loved the idea and had a small building constructed near the staff quarters. They hired a teacher from town. In 2 months, they had 15 children learning to read and write. Marianne visited the school often, bringing sweets she baked, sitting to listen to the children recite the alphabet. She saw their eyes shine with new knowledge and felt she was making a difference. She also convinced Robert to open the estate for parties again. They held a dinner for neighbors, a reception for the priest, a harvest festival with a bonfire and dancing. The mansion had life, laughter, music again. Robert sometimes seemed startled by the bustle, but Marianne saw genuine joy in his eyes. "You transformed this place," he said one night after the last guests left. "Transformed my life." Marianne rested her head on his shoulder. "We transformed it together." But happiness had an expiration date, and they both knew it. Robert began having episodes of intense fatigue. He needed to rest after small efforts. Some mornings he woke with chest pain he tried to hide, but Marianne noticed. Dr. Albright came every week to examine him, leaving stronger medicine, and his look grew more worried with each visit. One afternoon in April, 6 months after the wedding, the doctor asked to speak to Marianne alone. "She needs to be prepared," Dr. Albright said with kindness but firmness. "His heart is very weak, could be a matter of weeks." Marianne felt as if the floor had been ripped from under her. "Weeks," she repeated with a hollow voice. "Are you sure?" The doctor nodded sorrowfully. "I'm sorry. I know you were building a life together, but Robert is in the final stages. The best we can do is keep him comfortable, pain-free." Marianne thanked him with an automatic voice, and when the doctor left, she walked to the orchard, away from prying eyes, and finally allowed despair to swallow her. She cried until she had no more tears, until she was empty. When she returned to the house with swollen eyes, she found Robert waiting in the library. He looked at her and knew immediately. "The doctor told you, didn't he?" It wasn't a question. Marianne nodded, unable to speak. Robert opened his arms and she ran into them, clinging to him as if she could stop him from leaving by sheer force of will. "I don't want to lose you," she sobbed against his chest. "I'm not ready." Robert held her tight, kissing the top of her head repeatedly. "I'm not ready to go either, but we have no choice, my love. The only choice we have is how we live the time remaining." They decided not to waste a single moment in sadness. In the following weeks, they lived intensely, almost feverishly. Robert wrote letters to important people in his life, apologizing for old absences, making peace. Marianne helped him organize a detailed will. Robert left a generous sum for each employee, donated part of the fortune to charity, left money to keep the school running. The rest, including the estate, would go to Marianne. She protested, saying she didn't marry for money, but Robert was inflexible. "I want you protected. I want you to live without worry. It is my last gift." If you are loving this story of true love, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to believe in love again. Robert also insisted on taking her to places he loved. They rode to the highest point of the estate, where one could see miles of rolling cotton fields. They sat there watching the sunset paint the sky purple and orange, fingers interlaced. They went to the hidden waterfall in the woods, where Robert played as a child. Marianne dipped her feet in the cold water while Robert told childhood stories. They spent a whole afternoon in the garden, Robert teaching the names of every flower, while Marianne memorized every word, every gesture, every look. One night, Robert asked to dance. There was no music, but he hummed a waltz softly as they spun around the empty living room. Marianne rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his irregular heart beating against hers. She promised she would remember that moment forever, the way he held her with precious care, the way he looked at her as if engraving the image on his soul. They also talked about the future, about what Marianne would do when he was gone. Robert encouraged her to continue the projects, keep the farm alive, be happy. "Promise you will live fully," he said, holding her face in his hands. "Promise you won't lock yourself in grief like I did. You have a whole life ahead." Marianne cried and promised, though she didn't know how she would keep it. Robert made her promise too, that if she ever found someone who made her happy, she wouldn't hesitate because of him. "My love for you has no expiration date, Marianne. It will continue even after I'm gone, and that love wants your happiness always." The decline was rapid. By mid-May, Robert could no longer leave his bed. Dr. Albright came twice a day, administering morphine for the pain. Marianne practically lived in the room beside him, sleeping in the armchair to be close, in case he needed anything. Mrs. Mercer helped her, bringing food Marianne barely touched, insisting she rest a little. Father Anthony visited daily, prayed with Robert, offered spiritual comfort. On a morning in late May, almost 7 months after the wedding, Marianne woke with Robert calling for her with a weak voice. She jumped from the chair and ran to his bedside. "I'm here, my love." "What do you need?" Robert tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace of pain. "Just wanted to see you, make sure it's real, that you really exist." Marianne held his hand, which was too cold. "I'm real. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Robert squeezed her fingers with surprising strength. "These months with you were the best of my life, Marianne, worth all the decades before. I regret nothing." Marianne kissed his hand, tears wetting his pale skin. "I don't regret it either." "Not 1 second." Robert pulled her to lie beside him in the bed. She settled carefully, resting her head on his shoulder, her arm over his chest, which rose and fell irregularly. They stayed like that for hours, sometimes in silence, sometimes whispering favorite memories, words of love, promises of meeting again somewhere beyond. It was late afternoon, when the sun began to set, filling the room with golden light, that Robert looked at Marianne with sudden clarity in his eyes. "Marianne, I want you to know you saved me. You didn't save me from death because that is inevitable, but you saved my life, gave me a reason to live again, made me remember how good it is to love and be loved." Marianne tried to respond, but he placed a finger over her lips. "Let me finish. Don't be afraid of what comes next. You are strong, brave, full of love to give. Keep living, keep loving, keep making a difference. And when your time comes, many, many years from now, I will be waiting." Marianne couldn't speak, could only cry as she held him. Robert stroked her hair one last time. "I love you, Marianne Allister, more than words can express." Marianne finally found her voice. "I love you too, more than anything, forever." Robert smiled, a genuine smile of absolute peace. "Then everything is all right. Everything is as it should be." He closed his eyes, still smiling, took one deep breath, two, and on the third, the breathing simply stopped. Marianne knew immediately. She felt the exact moment he departed, as if part of her had gone with him. She lay there holding him while the golden light turned to purple twilight, then complete darkness. It was Mrs. Mercer who finally entered, lit the candles, and saw the scene. She said nothing, just sat on the other side of the bed and cried silently with Marianne. The funeral was 2 days later. Half the county attended. The mansion Robert had brought back to life was now filled with people paying last respects. Marianne received condolences with dignity, her face pale but composed. She wore a simple black dress, hair pinned up, no tears. The tears would come later in the solitude of the room that still smelled of Robert, where she would sleep alone from then on. Cecily did not attend, but sent a letter saying she would contest the will. Marianne read the letter once and threw it in the fire. She had no energy for legal fights, but she didn't need to worry. Father Anthony, Dr. Albright, and several prominent community members made a point of making clear they supported Marianne and would testify to Robert's sanity when he wrote the will. Cecily backed down, realizing she stood alone. The first months were terribly difficult. Marianne wandered the mansion, seeing Robert in every corner. The chair where he read, the table where they dined, the garden where they walked. She cried herself to sleep from exhaustion, woke with swollen eyes, and repeated it all the next day. Mrs. Mercer stayed close, offering silent presence, forcing Marianne to eat at least one meal a day. It was the school that began to pull Marianne back. The children needed her. The teacher asked for help buying new books. Mothers asked advice on feeding their children. Slowly, Marianne began to get involved again. She started visiting the school daily, helping with lessons, telling stories. The children's laughter was a balm that slowly healed the wounds. Marianne also began to implement other dreams she and Robert had planned. She opened a small infirmary on the estate to tend to employees and their families, hired a nurse from town who came 3 times a week, started a food distribution program for needy families in the region. She used the fortune Robert left to make a difference in people's lives, honoring his memory through action. The estate remained productive under careful management. Marianne learned everything about cotton, accounting, management. Mr. Thomas helped her with infinite patience, explaining harvests, negotiations, sales. She proved to be a competent administrator, fair with staff, but firm when necessary. The workers respected her not just as the boss, but as a person who genuinely cared for their well-being. Years passed, 1930, 1931, 1932. Marianne did not remarry. There were suitors, men interested in the young rich widow, but she refused them all gently. She had loved deeply twice in her life. She didn't need a third time. She had purpose, meaningful work, precious memories. It was enough. In 1935, 6 years after Robert's death, Marianne was supervising the harvest when she saw an elegant carriage coming up the drive. She recognized the crest on the side with surprise. It was Cecily. Robert's niece, now about 34, stepped down with hesitant movements. She was visibly pregnant, belly large under an expensive dress. Marianne approached cautiously. "Cecily," she said in a neutral voice, "what brings you here?" Cecily looked around at the verdant fields, the well-kept mansion, the children playing near the school. "I came to apologize," she said finally, voice low. "It took 6 years, but I finally understood. You really loved my uncle, and he loved you. It wasn't about money. Never was." Marianne didn't answer, just waited. Cecily continued. "I was wrong. I was greedy, cruel, manipulative. I destroyed my relationship with the only relative I had left because of ambition. And now that I'm going to be a mother, I think about how I want my son to grow up. I don't want him to be like I was." Marianne studied the woman in front of her. She saw genuine regret in her eyes. "Do you want something from me?" she asked directly. Cecily shook her head. "I don't want money. I don't want anything material. I want forgiveness. I want to be able to tell my son that my uncle was a good man who found true love at the end of his life. I want him to know the truth, not the twisted version I created." Marianne stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "Robert would forgive you. So I forgive you too. But Cecily, we can't go back in time. We can't be the family we could have been." "I know," Cecily said, tears streaming. "But thank you for being a better person than I was, for loving my uncle as he deserved, for honoring his memory with all this you built." She gestured to the thriving farm. "He would be proud." Marianne felt her own tears threatening. "I hope so." Cecily said goodbye and left. Marianne never saw her again, but years later received a letter saying Cecily had a boy and named him Robert in honor of his uncle. It was a small redemption, but it meant something. The years continued to pass. Marianne aged with grace, hair turning grey, laugh lines marking her face, but her eyes remained alive, kind, full of the same light that attracted Robert decades before. The estate prospered. The school grew, serving not just staff children, but children from the whole county. The infirmary turned into a small hospital. Marianne became a beloved and respected figure, known for generosity and wisdom. In 1937, 8 years after Robert's death, Marianne received an unexpected visit. It was Dr. Albright, now very old and frail. "Marianne," he said with a tired voice, "I need to tell you something. Something Robert asked me to keep secret until you were ready." Marianne frowned, confused. The doctor pulled a yellowed envelope from his pocket. "Robert gave me this 2 days before he died. Asked me to give it to you when I thought the grief had passed. I think the time has come." Marianne took the envelope with trembling hands, recognized Robert's handwriting on the front. She opened it carefully and pulled out a letter written on fine paper. Began to read with vision blurred by tears. "My beloved Marianne, if you are reading this, it means years have passed since I left. It means you survived the pain, rebuilt your life, moved on as I made you promise. I am proud of you, my love. I always knew you were strong. I want you to know a few things. First, those months we lived together were a divine gift. I was destined to die alone, bitter, unhappy. You changed that. Gave me a different ending, an ending full of love and beauty. I will be eternally grateful. Second, carry no guilt. You didn't kill me. It was my time, but you made that time count. Transformed months into a whole lifetime of concentrated happiness. Third, and most important, live, Marianne. Live fully. Love again if someone appears. Do not bind yourself to the ghost of a dead man. I loved you enough to want your happiness above all. Honor our history by being happy, not by being a martyr. You were my redemption. Let our love be your strength, not your prison. When we meet again, I want to hear stories of a full life you lived, of joys you experienced, of love you shared. Until then, my eternal love, Robert." Marianne finished reading and hugged the letter against her chest, crying and smiling at the same time. Dr. Albright placed a hand on her shoulder. "He was a good man, that Robert. Very good. And you are too. Made a difference in each other's lives, and in the lives of many others. It's a beautiful legacy." Marianne nodded, unable to speak. The doctor said goodbye and left, leaving her alone with the letter and the memories. That night, Marianne went up to the highest point of the estate, the place where she and Robert watched the sunset so many times. Sat on the grass and looked at the cotton fields stretching infinitely under the full moonlight. "Thank you," she whispered to the starry sky. "Thank you for loving me. Thank you for teaching me it's possible to start over. Thank you for setting me free to live." And she felt, maybe it was imagination or maybe it was real, a presence beside her, a warmth, a comfort, as if Robert were there saying everything was fine, that she could move on. Marianne lived until she was 72. She died in 1967, 42 years after John, 38 years after Robert. She was surrounded by people she loved, including dozens of former students of the school she founded, staff who worked for her for decades, countless lives she touched through her kindness. When they prepared the burial, they found instructions she left. She wanted to be buried between her two husbands, had bought the plot in the cemetery years before, 3 lots side by side. John on the left, Robert on the right, and her in the middle. On her tombstone, she wanted just one phrase: loved truly, lived fully, made a difference. At the wake, an elderly lady who had been a student in the first class of the school read a letter Marianne left to be opened after her death. The letter told her story, about losing everything and rebuilding, about love that resisted judgment, about choosing to live intensely even knowing it would be brief. It ended with advice for all who listened. Do not wait for certainty of tomorrow to live today. Do not wait for perfect conditions to love. Do not waste time with fear or with what others will think. Life is too short, even when it is long. Love deeply. Forgive quickly, be kind always, and when someone special appears, even if at the wrong moment, even if they come with complications, do not let them slip away. Because true love is rare and precious, and a few months of true love are worth more than decades of safe loneliness. The words echoed in that small country cemetery, touching hearts, making people rethink choices, inspiring courage. And there, between the 2 headstones that guarded the men she loved, Marianne was buried as the sun set, painting the sky exactly the same colors it painted that afternoon when Robert proposed to her in the kitchen. Mrs. Mercer, who survived until 95, stayed until the end, the last witness of that unlikely love story. When everyone left and the cemetery was empty, she placed flowers on the 3 graves and whispered, "Rest in peace. You earned it," and walked out, knowing she had witnessed something rare and precious, love that transformed fear into courage, loneliness into connection, an ending into a new beginning. Willow Creek Estate continued operating for another 50 years, transformed into a cooperative, managed by the descendants of the staff Marianne trained and empowered. The school grew and became a respected institution. The hospital serves the region to this day, and on full moon nights, the elders still tell the young ones the story of the poor widow and the lonely millionaire who met in the kitchen and transformed pain into love, an end into a beginning, death into life. Because, in the end, that is what the best stories are about. Not perfect happy endings, but imperfect people who chose to love despite fear, live despite pain, believe despite uncertainty, and left the world a little better, a little kinder, a little more full of hope than they found it. Marianne and Robert did exactly that. And their story continues inspiring everyone who has the courage to believe it is never too late to start over, never too early to love, and that every day lived with truth and love is worth more than 1,000 days wasted in fear.